Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to a reading about the presidents. We are in the LBJ portion of the book here. And I want to thank you all for allowing the JFK reading video. That got quite a bit of attention, probably more than most of the others. But today we're going to do LBJ, and then we're going to do two more presidents after that. So Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27, 1908. Passed away January 22nd, 1973. Born in Stonewall, Texas, died in Johnson City, Texas. His father was Sam Ely Johnson Jr. His mother was Rebecca Baines Johnson. His wife was Lady Bird. Lyndon's wife was Lady Bird Johnson, but her given name was Claudia Alta Taylor Johnson. And they were married in November of 1934. Children was Linda Bird and Lucy Baines, possibly still alive today. Mr. Johnson, President Johnson, was part of the Disciples of Christ denomination. He attended Southwest Texas State Teachers College in 1930 and then graduated from Georgetown Law School in 1934. He was a teacher and a lawyer. He served in World War II in the Navy Reserve, joined the Navy Reserve in January 1940. He was a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy December 41 through July 42, so about 7 months. Political life, National Youth Administration and Texas Administrator for 2 years, U.S. Representative for 2 years, U.S. Senator for quite a long time. It's 10, 11, 12 years. Excuse me. And Vice President for 2 years. He only served one term, took office upon President Kennedy's assassination. He was a Democrat. He declined to run for a second term. His vice president was Hubert Humphrey for 4 years. In the election of 1964, Mr. Johnson got 486 electoral votes. Barry Goldwater, only 52. Ouch. In the popular vote, Mr. Johnson got 43,129,566. Mr. Goldwater got 27,178,188. The cabinet of Mr. Johnson included Dean Rusk for Secretary of State, S. Douglas Dillon for Secretary of the Treasury, followed by Henry M. Fowler, followed by Joseph Barr, one of his related to Bill Barr. Secretary of Defense was Robert S. McNamara, followed by Clark Clifford. For Attorney General, Robert Kennedy stayed on, interestingly, followed by Nicholas B. Achenbach, followed by Ramsey Clark. Postmaster General was John Gronowski, followed by Lawrence F. O'Brien, followed by W. Marvin Watson. For Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall. For Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman. For Secretary of Commerce, Luther Hodges, followed by John Connor, followed by Alexander B. Trowbridge, followed by C.R. Smith. Secretary of Labor, W. Willard Wirtz. Secretary of Health, Education and Welfare, Anthony J. Celebrezze. John W. Gardner, followed by Wilbur J. Cohen. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in the brand new post, HUD, Robert C. Weaver. And the Secretary of Transportation for the first time was Alan S. Boyd. All right. National Youth Administration, NYA, 1935 to 1943. NYA started in June 1935 with LBJ as its first director. The purpose of the National Youth Administration was to employ the youth of the state, as well as provide education and counseling to them during the Great Depression. Many worked building projects, including construction of highways, playgrounds, and other recreational areas and parks. The program was disbanded during World War II. Supreme Court appointments under Mr. Johnson was Abe Fortas and Thurgood Marshall. We've heard of him. We've heard of Mr. Marshall. He was replaced by Clarence. What's his last name? Clarence Thomas. State of the Union. U.S. population in 1963 was 179,323,031. National debt in 1969 was 368,225,581,254. Civil rights workers slain in Mississippi, August 4th, 1964. The bodies of 3 civil rights workers were found in a partially constructed dam about 6 miles from the town they were last seen visiting 6 weeks earlier. Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman were from New York, and James Cheney, an African American from Meridian, Mississippi, have been accompanying them as they travel through Mississippi, trying to encourage blacks to register to vote. The actions prompted local KKK members to lure them to a church site on June 21st, 1964, and slay them. 40 years later, a jury convicted a now elderly Edgar Ray Killen for manslaughter of the 3 men and sentenced him to 60 years imprisonment. Took 40 years to put him in prison. Shame. Sorry. Excuse me. Did we know that Mr. Johnson liked to give presents to friends, especially electric toothbrushes, since that would ensure they would think of him both in the morning and at night? Funny. LBJ was the first president to appoint an African American to the cabinet and to the Supreme Court. Mr. Johnson's swearing in was the first by a woman and the only one on an airplane. The Great Society. The Great Society was a term coined by President Johnson in 1964 to describe new social programs to fight his war on poverty and improve the lives of Americans. The Social Security Act of 1965 established Medicare, which helps pay health care expenses for Americans over 65 years of age. Medicaid also was created by this law and provides health care to citizens unable to afford it themselves. Other significant Great Society programs included the 65 Elementary and Secondary Act, earmarking federal funds to help defray costs for local school districts. Head Start to provide preschool education for lower-income children. Job Corps giving disadvantaged youth job training. Vista Volunteers, a domestic version of the Peace Corps. Corporation for Public Broadcasting. 1968 Fair Housing Act prohibiting discrimination in housing, and many others. Did we know Johnson patrolled the White House at night, turning off the lights to save the taxpayers' money? Civil Rights Act of 1964. Originally proposed by President Kennedy, the House Rules Committee chairman had stalled the Civil Rights Act. But after the president's assassination, Johnson pushed for its passage and gained public support for it as well. Its purpose was to eliminate discrimination against any group of voting, for voting, employment, or use of public services such as city buses. President Johnson signed it into law July 2nd, 1964. Johnson would sometimes pull up his shirt to show off his scar from gallbladder surgery. LBJ received criticism for picking up one of the family beagles by its ears. Chaos of 1968. While voices grew in number and volume protesting the Vietnam War, the country's fabric of civility seemed to tear itself apart during the spring and summer of '68. Following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in April, riots broke out in more than 100 cities, including Chicago and D.C. Chicago experienced more violence when it hosted the Democratic Convention in August. Anti-war protests attracted thousands of police responding in riot gear with mace and clubs. Americans, including the president, watched the brawling and horror on television. It seemed the country was spiraling out of control. And that's it for Mr. Johnson. I'll be back with Mr. Nixon. Ooh.